Welcome, Chosen X. You enter a hush that draws conversations into the still space your presence creates. People notice because their measures wobble. Their curiosity frays into unease. They attempt to fit you into explanations that keep their own lives tidy, but your internal compass points along a plane they cannot chart. You listen in a mode that reads intention as texture rather than noise. This is not a sudden conversion but a deliberate recalibration as you learn to distinguish signal from static. You feel small shifts in the air before events take shape. Those sensations are like a low tide beneath behavior, gently directing you toward openings and away from traps. You test these impressions before you commit, and that habit reshapes your days. Around you, patterns show seams and conversations become transparent. Smiles that felt warm reveal the economy beneath them, and casual remarks become rehearsed lines. People who once orbited you revise assumptions because you no longer supply the empty space they expected. Some retreat into defensive politeness. Others amplify approval until it is performative. You do not answer with anger. You note the movements and use them to inform boundaries. A different mercy arises from seeing the plays of defense. Awareness births a clear, steady compassion. You begin to recognize the habits people adopted to feel safe and the stories they repeat to anchor themselves. Your compassion is not pardon. It refuses reflexive retaliation. Presence becomes the instrument that loosens manipulation. Your tempo changes. Where urgency once ruled, you let timing be an exercise in listening. Choices are made in a way that privileges coherence over haste. You enter rooms with careful gestures and speech, letting silence scaffold your voice. That silence is not empty. It is a field that lets your interventions land with calm authority. Others misread restraint as aloofness. They cannot see that your quiet contains intention and readiness. When this interior calibration meets the world, outcomes realign in ways that seem improbable. Doors open, projects realign, and setbacks invite redesign. This is not a supernatural favor. It is the consequence of attention applied at a new amplitude. Systems tuned to older rhythms respond differently to a new range of attention. Not everyone greets this calmly. Faces flicker with recalculation and people invent simple stories to soothe discomfort. Allow them their narratives. Gossip exposes limits, not your truth. Remain anchored to the ledger you keep inside and let it steady you. Distance will sometimes feel like exile. Name it without letting it define you. Often solitude is the laboratory where new faculties form. Use the hush to test impressions and practice patient skepticism. Train yourself to act from verified sensing rather than impulse. That discipline strengthens your capacity to move before circumstances ossify. In the quiet practice of this season, you refine a method of living that is both practical and luminous. You learn to regard attention as a form of care that must be directed, conserved, and intentionally given. When you steward your focus, you discover new economies of influence, energy flows where you place your gaze, and choices made from that place tend to grow into more coherent results. This is not vanity. It is a skill of presence. Work with it, calibrate often, and allow the consequences to be the evidence of your refinement. Trust the slow accrual of small acts. Let consistency and integrity be the engine driving each decision you make. For good.as this season closes, plan an intention like a quiet marker. Commit to answering from depth rather than habit, to choosing reciprocal connection, and to holding compassion beside discernment. This orientation is neither a weapon nor a badge. It is a tuned instrument of attention. Keep it humble and it will reshape how life responds in steady, true ways. You leave the room carrying a silence that is not absence but revelation, a space carved out by attention where questions can land and be felt. People look for explanations in the habits they already own. They sort you into files that keep their world manageable. You do not fit those categories. That misfit status bends definitions and reveals seams. The life you once inhabited feels like a stage, arranged to keep motion predictable. You find yourself watching the mechanics behind smiles, the pulley work that animates polite gestures. Those mechanisms are clever because they rely on being unnoticed. You have learned to notice. In the act of noticing, you are changing the mechanism itself. Separation does not arrive as a sudden rupture. It expresses itself in small refusals to return to old scripts. You decline invitations that would replay the same loops. You stop replying to provocations that used to demand your energy. Each refusal is a sutured seam, a repair that reorganizes how you meet the world. Distance becomes a form of care. It is a protective architecture rather than punishment. Some brand this withdrawal as weakness. They name the economy of attention as retreat. They call your restraint fear. You know better. Quiet becomes an instrument. It lets you hear patterns of impulse and habit with clarity and movement when structure is pliable. This posture makes you inscrutable. Mystery becomes a side effect of disciplined listening. Loneliness comes for a season. The old languages of belonging do not translate into the new grammar you are learning. That exemption is a laboratory. In it you practice calibration, test the reach of insight and the stamina of resolve. You learn to attend without entanglement. In that laboratory you discover the anatomy of agreement. You study the contracts people enact by habit. Every nod, every accommodating silence, every quick laugh is a clause. Those clauses add up to a social covenant that rewards predictability and punishes departure. Understanding the covenant does not make you cruel. It makes you strategic about who you let into the design of your life. There is a subtle grief that comes with noticing. Where there was once warmth you may find calculation. Where there was shared delight you may find rehearsed mirth. You acknowledge the grief without letting it define your story. It becomes data held with tenderness. Grief teaches you to separate what is essential from what merely comforts memory. As perception sharpens, language follows. You choose words as one tightens a lens. You avoid phrases that inflate or obfuscate. Your conversation becomes a map of intention. When you speak, you offer coordinates that guide action. In silence, you hold the map for the next traveler. Recognition shifts in time. Some will double down on narratives that make you small. Others will attempt to mimic your posture without the interior architecture that supports it. Their mimicry reveals the gap between form and root. A few will cross the fracture to stand near you without copying. Those are the ones who have begun their own dismantling. They approach your attention not to consume but to match it. When those people arrive, there is a different exchange. You do not give them answers. You exchange methods. You show how to listen, how to tend inner weather, how to align choices so that life rearranges with less friction. The seams become thresholds when opened with care. The divorce between their movement and your being will shift into corridors for conversation at a different register. This period asks patience in a rigor that is kind. It asks you to resist triumphal impulses and remain devoted to tending. Your task is not to prove superiority or punish ignorance. Your work is fidelity to what you know and letting presence be the instruction manual others borrow when they are ready. Treat solitude as a crucible and make decisions as if building a vessel meant to hold the life you intend to steward. Breathe, then move on. You sense a current running through the city as if air itself carried an intelligence meant for those who pay attention. Small pressures arrive before events, and you answer with a practice that is nothing like hurry. You register impressions, map motives, and then wait for openings that feel coherent and honest. Those who once used spectacle to steer crowds now falter against the form of calm you embody. Their methods relied on scattering attention with noise. You refuse that tempo. You cultivate a deliberate cadence that moves with patient force. The consequence is precise. Where they bait you to react, you instead allow clearer patterns to form. You learn influence is invited rather than seized. When posture, intent, and timing align, possibilities converge toward you like streams toward a river. This is not a chance. It is practiced reciprocity. You do not take more than you can maintain. You care for what arrives and let growth justify choices made quietly. Around you, the structures that depended on certainty begin to loosen. Networks that traded integrity for quick gain find maps that no longer lead. Privileged channels become brittle because their maintenance relies on predictability that has ended. Where they planned guaranteed outcomes, they now meet improvisation. You are not a manipulator. You will not engineer a collapse to vindicate a point. You work in another currency. Refusal becomes a sieve, keeping reciprocal commitments and letting corrosive demands drain away. That pruning is subtle but exact. It leaves the field leaner and more responsive. Sometimes conflict erupts. A former ally escalates expecting weakness to surface. You decline mirror tactics. You answer with calibrated questions and steady observation. That method unravels fabricated stories by allowing truth to emerge in the space you hold. A contagious influence spreads. Proximity to your rhythm alters those who seek advantage. Some imitate out of genuine hunger to learn. Others mimic to appropriate your access. You discern apprentices from copyists. The former you guide. The latter you sideline with a polite firmness that signals limits without needless cruelty. Energy is not infinite. You budget it, investing in people and projects that compound care into effect. Ventures meant for visibility are abandoned. Work guided by service expands. You notice that broader intention draws resources, as if attention becomes magnetic when anchored in purpose. Patterns of rise and collapse recur across eras. Reading them feels like learning a language. Mastering syntax gives you the liberty to compose new sentences for your life. You pick verbs that build, not verbs that eat. You choose collaborators who co-author rather than compete. Through this discipline you become a sender not by decree but by coherence. The circle that gathers is not about exclusion. It is demanding. Members commit to interior work, refuse facile narratives, and take responsibility for action. Those who cannot meet the terms step away with minimal drama. The real struggle is against constricted thinking, the smallness that insists every mystery be flattened into fear. Your defense of that terrain is not aggression. You secure a field where courage can practice and where honesty meets consequence. By the time this phase closes, the quiet victories have formed a rhythm. The geometry of your days changes. Decisions demand less anxiety and more direction. Ready yourself to move when openings appear and to hold when conservation is required. Expect subtle shifts in alliances and the arrival of people whose inner work has matured. They will approach with open hands and measured gaze. When they do, trade methods not trophies. Teach them to distinguish sensation from story, signal from noise. This transmission is patient. It multiplies when practiced. Keep humility at the center and let results be the quiet ledger that balances every account. Keep steady, choose clearly, shelter what matters. You wake into a sky that recognizes your name without hearing it. Light finds your rhythm and the world rearranges around that cadence. Clarity arrives like a memory. That memory sits behind your ribs as an old script not erased. As you breathe it into the present, internal mechanisms align and the map of possibility grows more detailed. You move through ordinary rooms and discover thresholds become porous. Barriers soften when you approach with steadiness. Time loosens so cause and arrival fold into the same moment. In those junctures you are both actor and witness, composing motion and receiving consequence at once. Such moments are less about proving and more about embodying an intelligence that knows the next chord before it is played. Symbols gather around your life like migratory birds. A billboard, a phrase overheard, a pause in another's sentence will appear as a hinge opening a corridor of meaning. You treat these signs as invitations, not commands. Each requires discernment and the courage to refuse those that do not expand the field you intend to steward. Within you trust reforms. Old contracts dissolve into agreements that honor depth over spectacle. Commitments become fewer and more potent. You cultivate alliances that reflect inner coherence and provide reciprocal nourishment rather than applause. Companions who remain carry their own labor of attention, not those who ride your frequency like a borrowed coat. Your body calibrates to support this widening. Sleep patterns rearrange so dreams act as laboratories for insight. Hunger for idle approval recedes. Appetite for honest exchange expands. Nourishment now comes through conversations that probe, experiences that stretch, and work that requires precision rather than performance. The practice of restraint becomes a source of creative power. As your inner instrument tunes, external forces respond. Opportunities converge with a precision that feels less like luck and more like a consequence of fidelity. Doors open from unexpected angles, not because you seek favor but because you refuse dissonance. Momentum accumulates not through hustle but through aligned intention. This momentum is gentle and stern. It carries continuity rather than frenzy. The veil between what you thought separate and what you now know to be woven is thinning. Patterns reveal themselves as languages rather than accidents, and you develop fluency. You read the movement of an idea across a room and sense where it will land. This fluency cultivates stewardship. Use insight with restraint and engage only when your involvement enlarges possibilities for others as well as yourself. Tests arrive. Old friends sometimes mistake elevation for abandonment. Others measure worth by recognition you no longer accept. Answer these tensions with presence that clarifies rather than condemns. Boundaries are taught like an art. Demonstrate saying yes with courage and no with compassion. At the crest of this sequence, solitude and service converge. You are no longer split between private altar and public stage. The two become one practice. In this union, actions become quietly monumental. Small gestures carry proportionate consequences. A word offered with the right intensity recalibrates a system. A pause where noise once rushed reshapes direction. Ascension is not an exit from humanity. It is an expansion of care. As you claim, this broader scope of compassion must remain exacting. Not all hurt should be indulged. Not all suffering should be explained away. Hold tension with fidelity so the field you influence becomes hospitable to truth and responsibility. When you move through crowds, you do so as a contour of steadiness. People feel that steadiness is like a tide underfoot. Some lean on it. Others resist it. Neither reaction should entice you into performance or withdrawal. Refine the frequency that hosts your presence. Let it be a bridge and a shield. Now ready, you will carry what you learned into a living demonstration. Actions will teach more than words. Your life will speak of responsibility wrapped in wonder. Stay gentle in correction and fierce in truth. Offer doors that open practice, not dependency. Witness how quiet fidelity reshapes days. Let attention drive steady change, let love be measured now. You step into the place where private practice meets public work and everything you have cultivated in silence begins to speak through your choices. Your presence shifts possibility by the measure of attention you sustain. People notice it not as show but as a gravity that reorders small events into durable patterns. You hold two tasks simultaneously, maintaining inner ground and tending the shape of what wishes to form. That double attention makes you a translator, converting subtle impressions into practical pathways. You steward openings with care and keep the edges hospitable so that new things can breathe and grow. The life you build refuses noise. It demands constancy and precise compassion. Invitations arrive that test refinement. Some glitter but have no weight. Others require small sacrifices in service of deeper fidelity. You select by whether an offer sustains depth rather than inflates image. Those choices redraw the map of influence around you. The company that remains closest carries its own work of attention and deepens rather than dilutes the field. You see results. Projects that once lagged gain coherence. Conversations bypass rumor and land in practice. Resources align as readiness meets opportunity. This alignment is not random. It is the arithmetic of disciplined presence compounded over time. Each careful decision accumulates into a momentum that feels effortless because the mechanics are internalized. You are called to witness. Teach by example, not by pronouncement. When you model steady restraint and exacting care, you hand others a method rather than a mask. Offer openings and show how to use them, and people will copy the motion rather than the posture. Resistance will appear. Some attempt to constrict your field. Others mimic form without building the inner architecture. A few respond poorly because your clarity reveals their compromises. Expect discomfort. It is the grammar of change. Meet resistance with measure correction and refuse to perform in service of anything that weakens depth. There is a moment when description must yield to demonstration. Words will not suffice for those who need to see and do. For that reason, the next thread of this transmission continues in the video placed at the center of your screen. That clip carries the next layer of practice, showing concrete gestures that embody the principles you have practiced in private. Approach the video as a training ground. If this message lands, place deliberate attention there. Subscribing and turning on notifications becomes a practice of commitment, a small ritual that trains you to show up when the work calls. Do that and new material arrives to your attention at the precise moment it matters. When the playback begins, allow examples to instruct rather than convince. Notice how form is passed through repeated practice rather than bluster. Pause when you need to test sensation and apply the suggested exercises as experiments in fidelity. If you accept this invitation, you join a field that values endurance over flash, care over charisma, and truth over comfort. Your role is not to carry everyone but to make the passage clearer for those willing to travel. Keep attention as your most precious currency. Tend it, teach its economy, and let the next transmission deepen what you forged in solitude. Inside that recording you will find demonstrations, quiet prompts, and short exercises intended to move insight into habit. The sequences are practical and compact, built to be practiced repeatedly rather than consumed passively. Treat them as experiments, record responses, return to segments that register as alive, and watch small practices accumulate into a new grammar for choosing. Show up for the work and the work will show up for you. Commit to presence and you will see how life subtly responds. Try it.